And if you want to read all of the advice or the majority of my advice, definitely check out that compendium. If you are a $15 tier member, you already have access to it in that welcome note. There should be a link. Look at it there. Or if you're a $5 tier member, then upgrade to the 15 so that way you can watch these a week earlier, or you can just go buy that compendium on my Gumroad channel. So, but speaking of my Gumroad channel, all right, there you go. Yeah, you can go to my LINKTREE and you can go check it out. But this is going to be my reaction now for some more shorts. I kind of wanted to watch 2 shorts and then a video, and I'm gonna give you my feedback as we go. So let's do this. This is why Kishimoto changed Naruto's something. I have no idea. So let's get to it.
Speaking of Kishimoto, you may have noticed, if you read the Naruto manga, that his art style changed a lot from the first chapter to the last chapter. And that's because Kishimoto saw the anime adaptation and how the Naruto characters were designed. He thought it was better than the way he was designing for the manga, so he changed his style to make it look more like the anime itself. The change was gradual. He changed it during the Search for Tsunade arc. It's interesting, if you read the Chunin exams and then you skip the Search for Tsunade arc and go straight to the Sasuke retrieval arc, the art style is very different. Personally, I prefer the second style, the one that looks more like the anime, but I like both.
Yeah, I remember that. It was I read Naruto when it was coming out in the 2000s, and his art style did drastically change, and I like both of them. I think that I heard this somewhere. I'm not sure if this was in an interview that he had, but he basically said something to the effect of, once he learned anatomy, it really stiffened up his style. And, him learning anatomy probably was because of, the anime, looking at this, maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. I have no idea. But I mean, you definitely did see a large jump, and you see that with every artist. You could look at One Piece, you could look at Bleach, you could look at even Toriko. I mean, Toriko is probably the closest one from the very beginning to the very end. But I mean, it is, it's night and day. Same thing with Bakuman, Death Note. I mean, it is pretty much every artist. If you're drawing a series for a very long time, eventually your art style is going to change. And the reason why is because it becomes easier to draw that character. You start figuring out different shortcuts that either look cooler or, at least make you faster to put out this story. So, that's pretty cool. So, all right, we're going to watch one more short. Which one should I watch? I'm going to watch this one. And after that, I really want to watch this right here, the Iraqi Rule. That's a 15-minute video, so that'll be a longer reaction, but let's do it.
How manga artists use real photos to create incredible backgrounds. Being an illustrator for a manga is a terribly difficult job with tight deadlines and grueling work schedules, so artists have to get clever whenever possible. One technique that can speed up the process is taking pictures and using them as the background. Inio Asano is known for his beautifully intricate depictions of daily life in manga such as Goodnight Pun Pun and Dead Dead Demons Diddy Destruction, where he heavily focuses on texture. He incorporates photographs that he takes himself into his backgrounds. First he makes the image monochrome, uses a threshold filter to remove mids, then prints out the picture and draws even more details on top, making it look hand-drawn. His combinations of analog and digital techniques create some of the most stunning manga artwork I've ever seen.
That is a really awesome technique. I have never thought about doing that, but I definitely think that would be awesome now. The main thing that sucks about my art is my characters are so cartoony and so not detailed that having a detailed background like this, that looks real, would look so off-putting compared to having Stud run around with his hammer fists. I mean, that's such a crazy juxtaposition that I don't think it would look right. So that's the only thing that sucks about how I draw. I really need to find a happy medium. But yeah, this is kind of this is a really good way of doing it. Again, I talked about this in a previous video, and I probably will talk about this in a future video, but AI does the same thing. Well, not the same thing, but I mean, they definitely do something like this. And I think that eventually it'll get to the point where people just start utilizing AI to, create better backgrounds. I have no idea whether or not this artist has assistants. I would assume so, because if you work in Japan, if you draw manga in Japan, that's like an actual industry. That's like, a 9 to 5 job to be an assistant on a manga, which is amazing. I would love that. But I mean, I would assume he has assistants because a lot of manga artists do have assistants, but some of them don't. I know that the creator of Hunter x Hunter doesn't have assistants, for instance. So, and I don't have assistants right now anyway. So, I don't know. I think that eventually it'll get to the point where having assistants on your work will be a luxury, and it will make your stuff look slightly more authentic. But there are a lot of people right now that actually either have assistants that create backgrounds for them using AI or other programs like Google Sketch and other stuff like that. So I mean, I don't know. I think an assistant can do a lot of stuff to help you, just make your work the best it can be. And at the moment, I have not crossed into that threshold of AI or having assistants to help me with AI or anything in that regard. But I do think that that's an inevitability for at least me in the future. It hasn't happened yet. I'm not sure if it'll happen sooner rather than later. But I mean, that's something that if you are an artist, amateur artist, or anything like that, just think about it. Try to think about how you can utilize AI to work for yourself, because if you can do that, then you're ahead of the game. So, yeah. All right, so we are going to watch this. I'm not sure if it'll allow me to watch the entire video, like, on the screen like this. Let's see if it looks good or not. Okay, yeah, it does. All right, so right after this ad, we're going to watch this video. This video is 15 minutes long. It is called The Secret to Making a Perfect Art Style. I just want to say that I think I've created an art style that, is very recognizable. I think I did a lot of things to make this really cool. So I'm really interested to see exactly what this is going to be like. And to be honest with you, I think probably some of these techniques or, excerpts are going to were inside of Araki's book, which I have not gotten. And I really want to get one day. I want to read that. But let's look at this.
Best looking manga have in
Hold
common.
on.
You probably think there's no
All right, let's start this over. Okay.
a way to objectively define what the
Can you go
perfect
back?
art
Go back.
What do all of the best looking manga have in common? You probably think there's no way to objectively define what the perfect art style looks like. We all know who the best artists are, but we also know how different their styles look. So even though we all have our own idea of what the best art style is, there's actually a simple way to separate all of the best art styles from everyone else. That's why in this video, I'd like to talk about the 3 steps to making a perfect art style, analyze how they're each applied by the best artists in manga, and explain what it is that all of the best artists have in common. But before I talk about those 3 steps, first let's discuss what an art style really is. Because while I'm sure everyone basically knows what I'm talking about, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Style is all about how you distinguish something. It's the way you make something stand out from everything else. So in the context of art, it's the way you draw art that makes it stand out from all of the other artists. When we're talking about manga, or any comics for that matter, that usually comes down to how you draw your characters. Specifically, the techniques you use to draw your characters. This can include things such as lining, coloring, expression, and plenty more. Objects can be included, as not everyone is going to draw the same object the same way. Backgrounds and panels are a less common example, since it's harder to draw these kinds of things and not have them look like everyone else's, but one of the secrets we'll talk about later does include these kinds of techniques. But the real question is, okay, I get what an art style is, but how do you make an art style? There's no right or wrong answer, but one of the best definitions you'll find comes from one of the most successful creators in manga, Araki. In his own book, Manga in Theory and Practice, Araki explains that all great manga artists have their...
It's not pausing. Okay. I told you it was in that book. I told you. Before he gets to this, I have not watched this video, but the best tips, in my opinion, would be to look at your favorite artists, several of them. I actually talk about this in my compendium, so you can go get that and check it out. But it's in the section of the drawing basics. But what I think is look at your favorite artists, try to replicate their art style, and eventually, as you do that, you start picking up on certain things that they do and you start to incorporate it in your own art style. And then once you do that, as you draw more, you'll start honing in on something that looks more unique and more, you know, geared towards your style, your storytelling and your style and stuff like that. Another thing to keep in mind is that when it comes to style itself, what that is basically just shortcuts on how to draw something in a you know, a successful and also quick way. A lot of people that have deadlines, if your deadline is coming up, you got to put this, you know, pen to the paper and get something done really quick. You will create shortcuts very quickly in your head. Say, okay, if I do this, it'll still, you know, get the point across. So that also, in my opinion, you know, is style as well. But let's see what Araki says and what this guy says.
Own clear style. He then clarifies that the key to a great art style is balancing two conflicting elements. Realism is obviously the pursuit of making your art imitate real life. Signification, on the other hand, aims to create instantly iconic imagery through the use of abstraction. Naturally, these two approaches are conflicting because the further you lean into one, the less you make use of the other. A great example of this was the infamous Ugly Sonic before they went back and remade.
That was such a tragedy. I'm glad that they did not go and make this movie with this Sonic, because there's like, what, 4 of them now? 3 of them, definitely. I think the 4th one was announced. I mean, I can only imagine what they would look like. If they look like this, that's crazy. That's so ugly.
Made the movies. Clearly, a realistic walking hedgehog would be offensively disgusting, so Paramount needed to make Sonic more abstract. It was less realistic, but it was realistic enough that Sonic retained his iconic look while still imitating a real 3D character. So, as you can see, the key to crafting a successful art style is to make your art imitate real life while also possessing certain abstract qualities that make it instantly recognizable. Some styles lean more into realism, some into signification, but they all balance both of these two elements. Now, like I said, everyone finds their own balance, and all of the best manga artists have different styles. So the real question is, how is it that these artists all follow the same rule and manage to create so many different styles? Well, this is where we need to talk about the 3 steps that every artist needs to follow in order to make use of Araki's big rule. But real quick, before I do that, make sure to become a member if you're enjoying the video. You get custom badges and emojis that you can show off in our live streams, and you can pick which series I cover next. But like I was saying, there's 3 things based off of Araki's rule that every great artist does, and you need to follow every one of these steps. The first step is to stylize your art. Now, that sounds like a no-duh moment, but there's more to it. Like we mentioned, you can either make art that's realistic, or you can make art that's recognizable. So if you want a recognizable style, you need to move away from realism and make your art somewhat simple and more abstract. This is something that Akira Toriyama did a great job of in Dragon Ball, because the designs are fairly simple, but you can recognize an Akira Toriyama character the second you see one. The same is true for Yusuke Murata. It doesn't matter if it's Eyeshield 21 or One Punch Man. The second you see one of his characters, you know he drew it. A more recent example of this that I think is completely underrated is Dandadan. Dandadan, drawn by Yukinobu Tatsu, is by no means realistic. The world of Dandadan is very detailed, but the characters are relatively abstract. They have big eyes, round faces, and their hair is usually made up of abstract shapes. In fact, one thing Dandadan has kind of become known for is its use of chibi faces and reaction faces. For example, in this panel, one of the characters is smiling so much that their mouth is stretched all across their face. Now, is this at all realistic? No. In fact, she looks more like a turtle more than a person. But again, Tatsu isn't trying to imitate real life here. In this panel, he's expressing an abstract concept, namely smiling so much that everyone can see it on your face. Seeing this panel instantly reminds you of a time someone was so happy that they had the biggest, dumbest grin on them.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I know he didn't say this yet, and I'm not sure if he will, but definitely exaggeration. Whenever you are creating your own style, exaggerate certain things. If you look at One Piece, in Frankie's shoulders, they're exaggerated to an absurd level. Um, you know, if you want something to be recognizable, exaggerate things in the way that look cool to you. Don't necessarily worry about what other people think. Other people think about your art style, because if you can exaggerate it and make it look really cool and be consistent, eventually people will fall in line and be like, "Oh wow, that's awesome." Case in point, One Piece. There's several people that said 3 swords, 1 in your mouth. That's ridiculous. And now Zoro is one of the most popular characters on the planet. So it's insane to think that. I remember back in 1998 when I first heard of One Piece, and then when I watched it on Cartoon Network in like 2000. What was it, 2004 or something like that. I thought the Zoro was ridiculous. I could never think seriously about anybody that has a sword in their mouth and they're like fighting somebody. And now when I see Zoro fight somebody with a sword in his mouth, when you watch the King versus Zoro fight, you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So this, it's such a crazy thing. But my point is that you can make anything cool if you truly believe in what you're drawing, and exaggerating, certain features and certain, traits are always, pretty cool to do whenever you're doing so. Okay, I'm rambling. Let's get back to
their face. And this is what we see. A smile that is so absurdly big that we immediately recognize the character's emotion. And this is why Tatsu draws his characters with simple faces. They don't look like real faces. They look more like a bunch of shapes. But they're realistic enough that they imitate real faces, and they're simple enough that Tatsu has plenty of room to express a wide array of motions, like a big dumb smile. So what you lose in realism, you gain in style and expression. It makes his characters recognizable and allows for the simple expression of the characters. It's the same reason people often describe his art as clean. Clean can mean a lot of things, but when you describe art as clean, it's usually because it's polished rather than full of detail. Like Yusuke Murata's art is clean. Hiro Mashima's art is clean. Tony Valente's art in Radiant is clean. These are all talented artists that keep their style simple.
Shout out to Tony Valente. He actually endorsed some of our Saturday AM books. So yeah, shout out to you, dude.
As a result, they're instantly recognizable and it allows them to use more expression. That being said, stylizing your art doesn't mean making it as simple as possible. The faces in Dandadan might be simple, but the overall character designs are full of detail. In fact, Tatsu clearly has an excellent understanding of what human anatomy is supposed to look like. When you see his characters, they aren't exactly realistic, but they have plenty of detail. An important distinction that often gets overlooked by fans considering these aren't the same things. Which brings us to the second step to making a perfect art style, namely adding detail. Notice I said detail and not realism. Like we talked about before, you want to use realism in your art, but realism doesn't mean making your art look exactly like real life. It means imitating real life. One, because it will only ever be an imitation and not the real thing, but also because by drawing stylized art, you're expressing ideas about these subjects that aren't always obvious in real life. This is something that Tatsu does a great job of, but a more popular example of this would be Tite Kubo's work in Bleach. If you put a panel of Bleach next to a panel of, say, One Piece, it's easy to say Bleach looks more realistic. But when you look at Bleach out of context, it is the furthest thing from realistic. The reason it feels realistic without looking realistic is because of the way Kubo adds detail. For example, let's look at Ichigo on the cover of volume 49. Now again, compared to something like One Piece, it does look realistic. But does this look like a real person? Not even close. The eyes are too slim, the nose is like one long pyramid, the hair looks more like a spiky wig, and the jaw jaw is like one long blade. But does this look detailed? Absolutely. The reason Bleach characters feel realistic isn't because they are realistic, but because they have a level of detail that makes them feel real. Ichigo's narrow gaze expresses his intense personality. His sharp nose and jaw give him a strong masculine look, and his spiky hair adds a sense of personality that balances out his overall reserved vibe.
I have been really wanting to reread Bleach. I have volumes 1 through 20 on my shelf, and I remember volumes 1 through 20 just being absolutely incredible. So I probably will be rereading it at some point in time. But I mean, this is kind of getting off track. When it comes to Bleach and One Piece, I mean, obviously One Piece is a lot more cartoony, but there's a lot of detail in One Piece. There's a crazy amount of detail in One Piece compared to Bleach. I mean, you know, Bleach is like very, very sleek, I would say. And I think that One Piece is just cartoonishly detailed. Like it's crazy, especially when you look at the backgrounds. Like, oh, holy shnikes. I mean, you know, it is a lot. But yeah, I think the main reason why I'm saying this is because when I look at the coloring of Bleach, I love the coloring of Bleach. I think it's amazing. It's very, very good. But I adore the coloring of One Piece. I mean, in my opinion, I feel like it has a lot more depth. I feel like you know, there's a lot more variation. It's a lot more of a variety. I mean, you know, I don't know. This might just be me. Maybe I'm biased. You know, I've always liked One Piece more than Bleach, but at the exact same time, I just, you know, artistically, I can understand where he's coming from, but that's just how I feel. So yeah, I just figured I'd put my 2 cents in there. If you agree with me, put it down in the comments down below. Again, you know, also, you know, follow me on social media if you have not already. That way you can check out all of my stuff. You can become a patron of mine. You know, this video is probably going to be on YouTube because I'm trying to cut up my long talks on my Patreon, which, by the way, you can watch. You know, if you're a $5 or $15 or any amount of tiers. However, yeah, so, you know, getting back to the video, let's do this.
You also have other details like the exaggerated shading and highlights, as well as the small details on Ichigo's clothes. By adding all of these details, Kubo creates a character that is still clearly abstract, but feels real because of the expressive details. These details express certain ideas that make the character feel like a real person rather than a mess of abstract shapes. It goes back to the idea of clean art. It's one thing to have a simple art style that's easy to remember, but what's even better is when you can add details in a way that allows for even more expression. And what's even more important isn't how much detail you can jam into one picture, but rather which details you deliberately focus on. Tatsu and Kubo both draw detailed characters, but they each focus on different details. While they both draw detailed clothes and objects, Kubo really leans into the shading and leaves a lot of his backgrounds blank, and Tatsu draws simple characters but leans into the dynamic action scenes and draws heavily detailed backgrounds. So the more manga you read, the more you notice how different artists focus on different things. Which brings us to the third and final step to making a perfect art style. Once you've stylized your art and added plenty of detail, the last thing you need to make your art style perfect is to make it you. And
Yes, I totally agree with this. I've seen an entire TikTok trend where it'll say, you know, does this art style look like me? And I'm gonna be honest with you, I feel like my art style looks like me. Like, I mean, you know, you can probably see Hammer in the background. It's very cartoonish, very, you know, out there, and, you know, like that's kind of like who I am. So I mean, you know, I think that yeah, your art style definitely should be you. You know, when I think about Apple Black, for instance, you know, white manga is, you know, very stoic, very you know, straightforward. He laughs every now and then. Like, I mean, you know, it's very like you know, sleek. And, you know, it perfectly, in my opinion, encapsulates exactly how he is as a person. So, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. You know, make your art style you. That's what you need to do.
I say that, I mean drawing art in a way that balances stylization and realism, but also does something that only you can do. Like a Rocky...
hate ads, so we're just gonna talk over this. All right, we're gonna skip now. Blah blah blah. All right.
Explained, you need some realism in your art, but you also need stylization so people can recognize your art as yours. And while part of that is simplifying your art with abstract shapes, that's something that everyone can do. Like we just talked about, what makes something truly stylized is drawing it in a way that nobody has seen before. Take Hiro Mashima. A lot of people will say Mashima's characters look like One Piece characters, but you can clearly tell the difference between a One Piece character and a fairy tale character. That is because, although it feels similar, Mashima draws characters using certain stylistic choices so that they look like something you haven't quite seen. It's not a matter of originality. There's only so many ways to draw a circle, so
Not only that, but no shade on One Piece, but Hiro Mashima's women look different. Like that's like, I mean, a lot of them look similar. I mean, but a lot of One Piece women look very very similar. So I mean, I don't know. Obviously you can tell, especially during the context of the story, but like you can definitely have like two female characters. Like I think during the Reverie, for instance, they had who was it? I can't think of her name. She was the princess of Dressrosa. She was in a dress, and also Vivi. And they had different hairstyles. And one of them had bangs. The other one had like little tassel things, which I think was Vivi, and she had her forehead. But their faces look exactly the same. Like you could tell the difference because of the story and reading it and their outfits and everything else. But I mean, they look exactly the same. Whereas Hiro Mashima, I feel like his female characters at least, look a lot different than Oda's. So I don't know. That's just my take. So.
trying to reinvent a circle doesn't mean you're a talented artist. Instead, it's a matter of personality. In other words, what can you add to the circle so that it isn't just a circle, but a circle you made? And when we're talking about personality in manga, I really don't think there's anyone that comes close to Atsushi Okubo, the creator of Soul Eater. Okubo follows the first two rules to the T. His characters are abstract and stylized, but there's also plenty of detail in his work. A great example of this is this panel of Krona. Clearly stylized and not at all realistic, but like we talked about, there's plenty of detail that expresses certain ideas. Now, when it comes to Okubo, he's good at a lot of things, but when we're talking about what makes Okubo Okubo, I think it comes down to one thing: being unhinged. There's a certain je ne sais quoi about his art. His simple, stylized characters are a major representation of that classic 2000s manga look. But even among the greats like Oda and Takei, none of these artists draw quite like Okubo does. And a big part of it is because whenever you look at the character expressions, the backgrounds, the action, whatever, it's all unhinged. And when I say unhinged, this is partly a reference to the madness. The madness is a big part of the story in Soul Eater, and its influence can be seen in the way Okubo draws just about everything. He draws with plenty of detail, but heavily leans into the abstract. For example, once you've seen Black Star and Kid's reaction to Excalibur, it's kind of hard to forget those weird faces. Once you've seen the moon from Soul Eater, you start to see it everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be really short, but I kind of look at Soul Eater's art as like, what if a goth kid was also inside of a manga and then exploded and became a world? And instead of being goth, he was very emo. Like back in the 2007, 2008 era, everybody was emo. They had stripes everywhere. I had checkerboard, wristbands and checkerboard shoes and all that sort of stuff. It was a good time. It was a good time. But I mean, that's when I look at Soul Eater, that's exactly the feel that I get. And I feel like I have no idea if this artist actually dresses like that, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he did. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So anyway, whatever, let's get back to it.
abstract representation of both the night as well as the madness that takes over the world of Soul Eater. You can also see this unhinged quality in the backgrounds of Soul Eater. You'll often see scenery with a warped sense of perspective, bending around a certain focal point rather than portrayed in a straightforward manner. Another great example of Okubo's unhinged art is the graffiti art you can find in color spreads. Granted, I'm pretty sure he doesn't do the actual graffiti and gets help from special artists. But I mean, come on. Who else do you know that makes regular use of something as abstract as graffiti and manga? He didn't invent it by any means, but he uses it so much and in such a way that it's become a part of his style. So much so that Kei Urana, the artist for Gachi Akuta who worked for Okubo, uses it in her story. Is that original? Not exactly, but it expresses a certain lineage where Okubo started the trend and Urana took it and started doing it in her own way. Which is exactly what I mean when I talk about personality over originality. Okubo's art is so iconic because nobody else draws like Okubo, and the reason for that is because Okubo makes his style his own. He likes graffiti art, so he makes it a part of his own art. He has a unhinged sense of creativity, so he makes art so abstract that it literally looks insane. But that's what makes him such a great artist. He draws with his own unique brand of creativity. Too often you come across someone who draws like Toriyama or like Oda or like Horikoshi, but those people don't draw like themselves. It's easy to draw a style that's familiar because it's already done before and people know what works and what doesn't. But the difference between a good art style and a perfect art style is something that balances stylization and realism while also implementing the artist's own personality. That's why Araki can explicitly tell you exactly how to make the best art style, but nobody can draw like he can. That's why Okubo can draw something that looks so much like all the other 2000s manga, but always stands out as something only he can draw. The secret is to make it you, to draw something that only you feel, only you want to draw. It doesn't have to be completely original, but it does have to be completely yours. And that is the simple secret to making a perfect art style. But what do you think? How would you?
I totally agree. I think that one of the pieces of advice that I gave earlier was try to create whenever you're drawing your style, try to pick your top favorite artists and then basically try to imitate their art style. And then as you do that, eventually you start having their art style influence your work. You'll start picking up on how people draw hands and you're like, okay, well, I really like how this person draws hands, so I'm gonna start drawing hands like that. And then you'll learn somebody else's art style and then you'll incorporate maybe how they draw faces. And then, eventually it'll start to blend to a point where it starts feeling more like you. And then the more you draw it, obviously you're going to add more things that you start thinking that look cool, that, you can exaggerate here. And, eventually it just gets to the point where it's just you. So I totally agree. That was a really cool video. Definitely shout out to Shonen Ouiji, I think is how you pronounce that. Drop on follow if you want. But this is the end of my video. If you've made it this far into the video, then thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I think you'll like probably some of these videos right here. Maybe subscribe and, click that notification bell so that way you can be notified the next time I put out another video. And if you want to watch the entire full episode, then go to my Patreon and pledge as little as $5. Everything is in the description box below. Deuces.